Mr. Friedman, we're sitting here in Prague after Obama visited the city yesterday. How does it feel to be an American at times like this?
I'm very proud. It's a great relief to have gotten rid of that horrible person who preceded him.
And you think he'll be delivering on the promises he's making? Does it seem like it from a U.S. point of view?
Yeah, as much as possible. It's going to take a long time. We're in a very bad situation. We had arguably one of the worst presidents in our history, if not the worst, who had 8 years to really do damage. And, he's a spoiled rich kid. He burned down the family house, crashed the family car, spent all the money. He's just done everything possible and was completely inflexible because, he talked about staying the course. He never adapted. So I think it's going to take a long time just to get back up to sort of normal. But the people are very much, I think they're confident that Obama will do it, and they seem patient. It's amazing that people don't seem to be in a hurry.
Will it sell more newspapers?
No. That's sort of like newspapers are dying, and I don't think, unless old people start buying two papers, maybe they'll be worried. But I've been watching this statistic over the last 10 or 15 years. I guess 10 or 15 years ago, the average newspaper reader was a white male of about 50. So now he's about 60 or 65. And it seems like just in the last year or two, suddenly we just went off a cliff with the newspapers. It was getting bad, but then it just... One problem is under the Bush administration, they permitted a lot of cross-ownership, and a few large media companies borrowed heavily to buy family-owned papers. And then the music stopped, and they couldn't renew their loans. And so the easiest thing is to just close down the paper. And that's what's happening.
So it is only from an economical point of view, there's some debt that can't be serviced, but on the other hand, you're also losing audience.
Yeah, both. It's the perfect storm.
Can't people read anymore?
I look at my daughter. She's 31, and while she was growing up, I worked at a newspaper. She would read the paper just to make me feel good. None of her friends ever read a newspaper. They would look at the web, and it's just a different mindset. It's newspapers for younger people, I think, are considered kind of old-fashioned and boring.
There was a dual role with newspapers. One was obviously a business proposition, but the other one was also a civic role in controlling government, in doing research on stories that should be researched, in creating a public sphere where people could communicate. Is this also going away?
This is very scary because the newspapers have the infrastructure and the money in the United States to have, for instance, an investigative team, 3 or 4 people constantly, and doing it. And, if you spend a month or 6 months, if you have a good story, the paper would like that because they could win a prize or something. But they can't afford that. And the web just isn't set up that way, financially or any other way. They're more they're like parasites, they use what other people do. So I've noticed that there are just fewer reporters assigned to cover an institution than there used to be. And so we don't have the diversity of opinion.
But what does it mean for the control function? What does it mean for the civic role? Does it just disappear?
It's very dangerous for the United States because this is a moment, as I said, it was a perfect storm. We're in a moment now where we're probably more involved in very complicated foreign policy challenges than before, ever before. And since it's a democracy, without having good news coverage, it's going to, if the economic situation gets worse, it's going to be much easier for some demagogue to get up and make crazy claims and be elected. I mean, this happened in the Depression too. They didn't get elected, but you know, we had Huey Long, we had all these crazy semi-fascistic men on white horses. So now we're in the right climate for that, unfortunately, and without good news coverage, it makes it even more likely or more dangerous.
So isn't there a public debate going on about losing this? Will just PBS be the one voice of the nation?
Well, what happened that's interesting, when these large companies borrowed a lot of money and bought out the papers, they're actually run by people who aren't journalists necessarily, usually not. And they don't really grasp, they don't have an intuitive feel for what's happening. And their real pressure is the stock price. And the analysts on Wall Street who tell them to buy or sell depending on income and spending and so on. And so the most expensive stuff that they can get rid of easily is the very thing that you're talking about. Foreign coverage, you know, to have someone from the United States live in Prague, for instance, for a year, it's like $250,000 or something. And so there goes all the foreign coverage. Long projects, long investigations. So it's a very financial decision. They're not really, there is a debate, but it's just going on in a few websites and places like a journalism school. And frankly, I think people are shocked. Really, the decline has been so fast that at this point, I think they haven't emerged from their shock. And I don't get the sense that there's really a coherent direction.
There is a lot of discussion in Europe about government support, in inverted commas, for newspapers, tax breaks, giving subscriptions to graduates, things like this. Would it be a feasible idea in the US?
Well, I think the subscription for the graduate, I guess that was Sarkozy, that could go, that could fly. But I think we have an inherent distrust of government among the press in the United States, and the idea that they would actually subsidize the product would be very scary. Because if you got a Bush in there again, you know, it would be dangerous. So I don't think that there are going to be subsidies. I think there'll be much more merging. Some big nonprofit institutions, universities or so on, may sort of absorb some of it. But frankly, we're in a jam. I mean, there's no easy solution right now.
So teaching journalism at Columbia University, what do you tell your students? Get lost?
No, I tell them to go to medical school. I don't know, you know, I told you earlier that I felt like I was teaching alchemy. You know, the thing is with journalists, they're maniacs. You know, their hair is on fire. They have to do it, and you see this in very dangerous places where they have authoritarian leaders throwing journalists in jail. They can't help it. They still do it. So there are going to be a certain number of idiots who, you know, whom I respect, young people who just want to be journalists. And, I also think if you're really young, you'll be able to come out of this because there'll be new patterns of financial setups. For instance, in the U.S. we have photographers band together, and they have sort of an agency that they can control, and it sells their product. I don't see why we can't have this with the web. You know, we can have 3 or 4 young people who are going to report on Central Europe, say, and you know, they could be here, and then they would sell their stuff. And we actually have a few examples of that now. We have Politico on the web. We have ProPublica, which is an investigative site of about 20 very good investigators. A very wealthy guy put up the money. Ironically, he made his money in selling these questionable mortgages. But he was very lucky, and he got out just before the crash. And he gave a lot of this money to some good people to run the ProPublica. So there'll be sort of specializations. It'll be narrow casting in a sense, the way we have it with radio, FM.